this a camera worth investing in if you're a professional photographer? That's the one question I'll be answering in this video. The Fujifilm GFX 50s Mark II is a formidable camera with an attractive offering, a considerably large sensor with striking color reproduction at an even more affordable price. However, the reality is that behind this modern body sits an older and in some ways dated sensor. This reality is what might shift consumers into two tribes, those that see this as an incredible value and those that are left wanting more. After months of testing this camera across varying conditions, I've got to really see where this camera excels and, more than any other tool before, experience the walls that narrow the reach of this product. You see, we're so used to technology hurtling forward in the imaging space, we have sometimes this unrelenting expectation of one camera that can do everything at all times. This is dumb. The sacrifices made in specialization by some flagship cameras for maximization is valuable and can serve a wide array of creators, but it'd be foolish to have this as the sole strategy for creative technology. Specialization is important because it helps to serve underrepresented creators in varying spaces and provides a different entry point for sharing their vision. This is the that gets lost in reviews when products are dissolved to speeds and feeds. I mean, we can all agree that context matters, right? The Fujifilm GFX 50s Mark II deserves context. With one camp championing this as an incredibly affordable pro imaging solution, and another prematurely calling it a flop, it's easy to get caught up in the noise around the product and forget that it's just a specialized tool for creating. I've shared my impressions of this camera and compared it to the GFX 100S in two previous videos. For my final review, I want to give those of you that may be considering this as a solution for your work a definitive opinion on where this camera works best after months of testing in professional environments. Let's get this started.
But God might be on vacation, and the promised land ain't never promised. My baby telling me to be patient, but the devil always working overnight, my darling.
A few months ago, I got brought on to shoot the cover of Now magazine, and the timing couldn't have been better. My Fujifilm GFX 100S had arrived, and I still had my review copy of the GFX 50s Mark II from Fujifilm. This would be the perfect opportunity to test these two cameras side by side and see how much does the 50s Mark II lag behind, or if that gap is inconsequential in professional hands. Let's start with the body of this camera and work our way in. Adopting the exact same shape and dimensions as the GFX 100S was a great move. You don't have the garish LCD bump of the first GFX camera, and more importantly, the entire piece has the footprint of a traditional DSLR. It's big, but not too big. At 900 grams, the body felt manageable in the studio and balanced nicely with higher-end GF glass. While it might vary for some photographers, I almost prefer this size in my commercial studio setting where you can easily grasp onto the camera and manipulate it in a very comfortable way. In the studio, there's hours of shooting with sporadic points of breaks and rest where the camera is set aside. In this instance, we were working about 8 hours, and not once did it feel laborious to pick up this camera. Here's the thing though, this could be different from person to person, as some might find it trickier to wield this thing where you might get some of the camera shakes when you're shooting at odd angles. Thankfully, the 50s Mark II inherits 6.5 stops of in-body image stabilization that works incredibly well for photography. You may have heard me talk about it before. Fujifilm may have shoddy results when it comes to image stabilization for video, but with respect to photography, they're nailing it. Time and time again, I was able to rely on this camera for sharp results at 1/30th of a second. With a bit more intention, I could even go as low as 1/10th of a second and get a great result. Admittedly, you may not go that low in many situations, but it just means that your shutter range where you find yourself working in most often gets much more reliable. If you plan on doing a lot of portrait work handheld and even in the field, the stabilization in this camera is going to really help you get the results you need. I'll get to the sensor and image quality soon, but I want to spend a bit more time on the experience using this camera. The viewfinder is not removable or adjustable. It's a 3.69 million OLED display that's fine. It doesn't give you that looking through a window feeling that some premium full-frame cameras adopt, but it's plenty good for the working professional. You can also use the back LCD to compose your shots, which I did on numerous occasions. This is a 3.2-inch, 2.36 million dot LCD display, and more importantly, a traditional three-way tilting display that makes it easier for you to capture low-angle photography. You don't have to perform these mental and physical gymnastics to line up a shot like you would with an LCD that flips to the side and fully articulates. I'm sure there's a bunch of passionate YouTubers that will disagree with me, but I believe this system is the best solution for professional photographers. Now, I've talked a lot about the experience of using this camera. Let's move on to the results you can expect from this thing. The 51.4 megapixel files are rich with detail with plenty of latitude for you as a professional creator. You can capture in various compressed and uncompressed modes that should help you manage file sizes, but if you're investing in this type of solution, you may want to squeeze the most you can have so you can future-proof your files a bit. The 14-bit RAW files preserve a good amount of shadow detail, though I wouldn't say it has night vision level recovery than some other modern solutions provide. It may not have quite the dynamic range as the GFX 100S, but it isn't a slouch by any means. With respect to noise performance, I could comfortably shoot up to ISO 6400 without hesitation. Noise is manageable and the sharpness doesn't suffer in any considerable way. In extreme situations, you can even go as high as 12,800 and still get usable results, but this might vary based on your personal threshold. While the sensor may be an older version, the results feel anything but old. These files are very robust and give you a lot of room to direct your creativity. With the addition of nostalgic negative and Eterna bleach bypass, you have 19 film simulations to take advantage on this camera. And I think most users may gravitate to Astia or Provia for their portrait work. Regardless of where you plant your flag, it's nice to see that you have every option available to you and that you can curate these into 6 custom modes. Being able to quickly switch from my black and white recipe to color has been a huge benefit in the field, where it helps me capture in a way that's best tuned for the environment, and to do that quickly. And as with any modern Fujifilm camera, the RAW file still has all the information. Your custom recipe is only baked into the JPEG, where the RAW file is showing a representation of the film simulation that you used before any changes are applied. All in all, these color options fit nicely into a medium format solution that's meant for pros and gives you a powerful way to build unique workflows for your photography. Now, I'll talk about some of the drawbacks of this camera in a moment, but let me first mention some other usability features. The top LCD is great to have, where you can view critical settings or the histogram at a glance. Though I would have preferred at least one higher performing card slot, having 2 UHS 2 SD card slots ultimately may be the best for the ecosystem where users only need one type of card and reader for their workflow. And using the same battery as the X-T4 and GFX 100S has led to a rating of over 400 shots per charge. In my workflow, I found that we were able to get through a full day with some juice left on the second battery. It's also worth noting that this camera supports USB-C charging. So if you're shooting tethered in the studio, the battery is being charged while you capture. In one situation, I was shocked. I was actually shocked for a moment when I looked at the camera and I thought, wow, we still have all this battery life left after nearly 2,000 shots, until my dumbass realized it had been charging via the tether cable in between. In any case, all of these items really make for a great professional imaging solution that should impress a lot of photographers. But there's still some areas where this camera underperforms, and these are the items that'll ultimately dictate if this camera is right for you. If you're asking me, the decision on whether this camera is right for you has to do with what it can't do, not what it can. The inclusion of an older sensor that isn't backside illuminated and relies on contrast-based focusing means that a camera like this is challenging to use in a fast-paced environment and even a low light situation. If you rely on accurate and fast autofocus for the work you do, this may be a primary reason why you skip this camera altogether. There's also a bit of this shutter lag that's common in media formats. And sure, this is faster than the solutions you'd historically find in this space. But at 3 frames per second combined with that lag, you have to be honest with your skill set. Can you nail the shot on command, or will you need something faster to give you a bit more latitude and succeed in getting the shot you need? The menu system isn't the most complex you'll find on a modern camera, but it isn't the easiest to navigate either. I've mentioned this in the past and I'll say it again. Fujifilm needs to look at revisiting the UI for their camera menus. I highly doubt that this camera will see a significant change here, but I want to use this opportunity to mention that as the feature set grows, the menu system on Fujifilm is beginning to feel crowded and could use a refresh. Next is the flash sync speed. It's 1/25th of a second and it's good, but it might be a challenge if you don't have really powerful lights and you want to freeze the moment. There's always the option for high-speed sync, but again, the lower quality lights that you're using, the trickier that this can become. Whether or not this is an issue for you will ultimately come down to what kind of lights you rely on for your work. Lastly, this camera has the ability to capture full HD video, but for all intents and purposes, don't look at this camera for video work. I'm sure someone out there will fight for the recognition of GFX solutions in video workflows, but at this time, I'm just taking the opposite argument. These cameras are phenomenal photography tools that don't do enough for them to be taken seriously for video production. And you know what? That's perfectly fine. Because like I alluded to earlier, specialization helps solve specific problems and improve accessibility across the board. In any case, these are the key items that you should consider before pulling the trigger on the GFX 50s Mark II for your work. None of these make the camera a failure by any means, especially when you consider the asking price. All it does is narrow the scope of the potential audience. Our job as creators is to simply find out if we see ourselves in that audience. The Fujifilm GFX 50s Mark II boldly drives the cost of digital media format photography down even further, where photographers that are into architecture, travel, portraits, still life, fine art, just to name a few, can consider this as a serious upgrade to their work. If you're looking at this camera, you're probably looking at some sort of top-tier solution for the work that you create. Making a decision here is easier when you know very well the speed of your working environment and the perspective you're going for. This format gives you a powerful perspective with stunning image quality, so long as you're not finding yourself in very fast-paced environments. If you're shooting action, sports, street, well, this is not something I'd recommend on being on your short list. I look at this camera and it feels like a win-win between the engineering and operations team at Fujifilm, where they have brought together a series of available parts to create something even more affordable in terms of an imaging solution that provides value for a specific group of photographers. Now, with that in mind, many of you may be wondering, how does this compare to the GFX 100s? That's a longer conversation, and I made an entire video last week dedicated to answering that question. In short, it comes back to looking at where you capture your images and how often. The 50s Mark II is a welcome addition to the camera market, don't get me wrong, but it enters it with a bit of a splash than a bang. The price tag and sensor may pique the interest of those looking to upgrade their current solution, but you have to manage expectations a little bit. Whether it was a nighttime fashion shoot or a daytime stroll, there were several instances where the camera couldn't execute as well as other solutions. And if you find yourself in challenging environments often, this may be a camera that leaves you wanting more. I've gone back and forth with this camera and ultimately I'm impressed. In this climate, to have these specs in this package at this price, that is an impressive feat, and creators ultimately win out. I've largely referenced professional creators in this review, but the offering here is something that even enthusiasts may consider. It's a product that deserves a spot in the Fujifilm lineup. I've been able to create some remarkable work with this sensor, and the files feel future-proof in a specific way. It's an empowering feeling that many photographers are still searching for. A camera like the 50s Mark II is fascinating because it addresses the concerns around accessibility and professional creative tools. Now, I'm not gonna say that this thing is cheap because you're still looking at $4,500 minimum for a body and a lens. But it wasn't that long ago that a product of this nature was easily 5 figures and unattainable for a wide gamut of creatives. If you're in a space where you are creating images for a living, whether it's for clients or for yourself, and the environment you're capturing in allows you to slow down and almost control the process, the 50s Mark II is something that may be able to elevate that experience while feeling rewarding in the process. I think the simplest answer though, and this might be a cop-out, is to try one for yourself. Find a way to test drive this solution in your creative world and see how it performs. That should definitively tell you whether the juice is worth the squeeze. And there you have it. That is my review of the Fujifilm GFX 50s Mark II. I hope you found it useful, or at the very least, enjoyed the production and images. I'd love to hear what you think, so let's continue this conversation in the comments below. As always, my name's Gajan. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.